Okay, so let's pick up with the rise of Homo sapiens, the rise of humans. And one of the things I hope you guys will keep in mind is that this is all an exercise in extending the identity beyond Homo sapiens sapiens into what it is to be human. Human goes back to the first bipedal, to the first homos. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to extend this lineage, extend this identity from Homo sapiens into humans. And I hope, too, that this whole thing has been an exercise when we look at the first cells, the first vertebrates. You're looking at your ancestors there as well. So I hope that this is an exercise in extending your identity to all things earthling. We have done this together. We're in this together. We have the same ancestors. And so that's one of the things I think is really, really valuable. Whenever we're looking at evolution, we're looking at this story. We have a chance to recognize that it's a story we share in common. It's a story from which we all draw identities. She agrees. Okay, so there are some themes here. First of all, I want us to get a quick little overview. So when we go from the earliest apes, 10 million years ago, finally, the first bipedal apes around 4 million-ish years ago, stone tools, Australopithecus, Homo habilis, and finally Homo erectus in 1.9 million years ago. And then it's not until around 500, 600,000 years ago that we start to see some of the ancestors that are especially familiar to us. So notice how long the history is of the Homo erectus. Homo habilis is still very much, we consider it the first human, but it's still very, very ape-like. Homo erectus is when we start to see our own shape and size. And the Homo erectus was around for a long time. So Homo erectus, 1.9 million years. We're going to talk about this a little bit in a second, but first let's recognize a few of the running themes. So as humans develop, we're going to see a few consistent steps. We're going to see on one level the consistent lightening of the skeleton, lightening of the jaw, lightening of the frame and of the body. We become lighter, smaller, actually. And this happens as we become more intelligent, as we become more efficient with our digestion, more efficient with our resources, which is, by the way, a product of developing fire and using fire to eat, which is really quite profound because the reality is that while Homo erectus was using fire to eat, and as we'll talk about, had invented the hearth, they had not yet evolved around the reality that they had used fire to eat. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Humans did evolve around this ability. This is why our stomach shrunk. We were able to get more intelligent as a result by sending more resources to the development of our brain, which continued to grow. Another running theme is the increased growth of the ability to develop social networks, which will become crucial when working through some difficult times. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. Okay, so let's check out Homo erectus. 1.9 million years ago, that's 9 times older than Homo sapiens. We're talking about a very, very long period in the development of humans. So this would have been a period we would have gone from behaving still a little bit, we believe, like apes, to behaving much more like what we think of as cavemen or something like this, working with fire around a hearth, cooking, hunting, using stone tools. Stone tools had been used, but now we're actually breaking the stone. We're actually shaping our own hand axes, which is considered a gargantuan breakthrough. Again, they had the first human-like body proportions with the large brains and the elongated legs. With these first hearths, we are able to kind of find a lot of the Neanderthals. And they seem to have, the Homo erectus. And they also, because they existed for such a long period of time, they coexisted with a lot of other Homo species. And one of the ones you'll see here that we won't talk about The Homo floresiensis is the hobbit-like creature that they found in the Oceania area. Okay, so Homo erectus, the hearth, cooking, much longer period. Okay, Homo Heidelbergensis, 700,000 years to 200,000 years ago. Homo Heidelbergensis was the first to use spears and to hunt big game, regularly to hunt big game. They were the first to build shelters out of wood and rock, and this enabled them to be to extend the range of human habitation into much colder latitudes. They used fire-hardened tools, which is fascinating. This is something that we still see in our mythological record, the putting of something in fire to make it harder, to make it more immortal, more enduring. We see this in the story of Isis and in the story of Demeter, both of whom put their babies, not their babies, another baby into the water in order to, into the fire in order to burn away the mortality. So here you see, this motif probably continues to pick up metallurgical elements, as this is something you would do with metallurgy, use fire to purify the metals and strengthen the metals. But this motif of purifying with fire and hardening and making more eternal and enduring with fire is something that would have been metaphorically recognized by Homo Heidelbergensis when they were using fire to harden their tools. They also seem to have been the first to bury their dead. Now, this is absolutely fascinating. This is another huge thread we're going to see with the rise of humans, the rise of symbolic thought. And one of the first examples of the rise of symbolic thought is the burial of the dead. Now, this is really interesting because you see religion often emerges in the context of death, out of the fear of death. It's one of the primary concerns of religion. So for another example is, of course, Christianity being adopted by the Western world, first by the Roman military. So where are you the closest to death, the most concerned about death? In the military. This is one of the places where religion is very important and is very persistent. So here you see in the confrontation of death, the emergence of some of the earliest symbolic metaphorical thinking as expressed through the burial of the early humans. Homo Neanderthalensis. This, by the way, continued. So just to continue that particular focus, the Neanderthals also buried their dead. And this is much more clearly recognized. It's debated a little bit more with their predecessors. But the Neanderthals definitely buried their dead. And not only did they bury their dead, but they buried their dead with grave offerings. This is incredible because this is very incredible because this demonstrates a very symbolic way of engaging the world, if not a spiritual, religious way of engaging the world. One of the things they would do is they would actually paint or color the dead or color the objects that were being buried with the dead in ochre. And we believe that this was symbolic of represented their belief that covering it in ochre would help carry whatever it is into the spirit world. They use much more diverse, sophisticated tools. Now, remember, tools are used by animals, bowerbirds dipping their, sticks and berries to paint their bowers with the berry juice, or apes use tools quite a lot. Tools are not uncommon, but tools become increasingly sophisticated, and by now the Neanderthals are using much more sophisticated tools. They're the first, we believe, to wear clothing. Their clothing, we believe, was much more rudimentary than what the humans would later develop. Much more loose-fitting, less shaped, probably using something more like a cut cord as a tether, almost more a tether than thread, to put together their clothing. This reminds us of the story of Adam and Eve, and in the folklore, his clothing is put together, held together by a single thread. Now, a question that we'll continue to ask with the Neanderthals is there a Cain and Abel scenario going on here? We know that the Neanderthals seem to have disappeared. And the question we've always assumed that we kind of wiped them out, survival of the fittest myth, right? That we were the more fit, and so we displaced them. But it's also distinctly possible that they were really wiped out by climate change, by a ice age. And we know that humans would have done better in an ice age because we require less calories, so we could make it through with through a pandemic much easier. We also have to look at what's getting us through this pandemic. One of the things getting us through this pandemic right now is our social fabric. Humans have always had a much more social way of dealing with the world. And so one of the things this enables us to do is to deal with hard times with each other, to help each other. So it's very possible that our tendency to take care of each other, to have much larger social networks, it's very possible that this is responsible for our ability to make it through the ice age in a way that the Neanderthals may not have. So one, we required less resources. Two, we were able to help each other more. And three, there may have been some competition. We may have actually actively displaced them. But four, we also seem to have interbred. So the Neanderthals also seem to have mixed considerably with Homo sapiens. So all of these factors seem to have happened at once. The amount of mixture of which one is more prominent than the other is something that'll vary from scholar to scholar. Okay, so let's move on. Let's look at the Denisovans. This is a very interesting species. We didn't know anything about the Denisovans until roughly 10 years or so ago. We found a knuckle bone in a cave that we knew was inhabited by Homo erectus and Neanderthals as well, and that later the Denisovans came through and lived there. We don't really know how old the Denisovans are. The dates are so sketchy, you won't really find a solid one anywhere you look, but let's say something like 400,000-ish years. They seem to have split off from the Neanderthals, which, by the way, split off from us before that. Or maybe it seems debated. I've seen it argued in multiple directions. And this is one of the things we should keep in mind. This is all very, in some ways, we're using very exact sciences to come up with what are still very unexact answers. Again, we didn't even know about we didn't know about Denisovans at all when you were born. And now we know that they make up a huge part of the genome of, for example, the Aborigine in Australia and in the South Pacific. Less so the East Pacific, less so, we believe, in South Korea or Japan. But you'll see it in Tibet. The Tibetans are especially able to breathe in high altitudes and live in higher altitudes with less oxygen. And it seems that this genetic breakthrough that enables them to do that is actually a breakthrough that was made by the Denisovans. It's also possible that they may have invented sewing even earlier. The needle, actually. It's possible that their needle is even older than the human needle. I mentioned that the Neanderthals were the first to sew, but that's a much more simple version than what you see with the actual needle. Okay, Homo sapiens, 300,000 years ago, lighter skeleton, jaws, and teeth, because they had evolved after the invention of fire, after the invention of cooking, after the reduction of the requirement of resources in the stomach. Those resources found a place to go. They went to the brain got bigger, the human got smarter. They evolved around more advanced tools. The tools supported our evolution, our language, our hands, our words. We started developing more advanced tools. We started to make more advanced stone tools, chipping them and refining them in more sophisticated ways, notching them. We've been eating shellfish for 164,000 years, cooking shellfish for 164,000 years. We've been using fishing tools for 90,000 years, and we've been using fish hooks for at least 20,000 years. Well, debated, something 25, 17, something like that. And we've been producing food like in a domesticated way for 12,000 years. Now, one of the things you should notice, though, there is that the fishing came on before the agriculture. So you'll see all these arguments that agriculture is where civilization started. But the reality is that the first cities were fish camps, and that these fishing camps were actually more so to serve the sea. So this is why you see that the earliest kings in myth are fisher kings. And so these fisher kings are the kings of these fishing villages supporting these fishers. And that's an early form of much more, not going to say domesticated, but fishing was much more reliable than just hunting, right? So when we started to develop more sophisticated ways of fishing, we started to have more consistent and stable civilization opportunities that started to emerge before agriculture and food production around the development of planting and of domestication of animals. Okay, but then we did domesticate animals. We did start planting, and it was iterative. First, we would notice that the boars, when fighting with each other, like Seth and Horus and myth, would stomp and stamp and push the seeds into the ground with their hooves, with their cloven hooves. And so then we would emulate this by pushing the seeds into the ground with a stick. And then this stick evolved into an adze, which cut into the ground. And then this adze would eventually evolve into a plow. So these are different waves of development. So first, the agriculture will spread, but that's spreading from a different center than the discovery of the plow. The plow was discovered somewhere else, and it spread from a different center. And so you see these different histories in the evolution of agriculture. But first, the earliest agriculture, which is always a hot topic, the earliest agriculture seems to have been in the Fertile Crescent. At least that's the argument. And that the Fertile Crescent, then later, 11,000 years ago, later in China and the Americas. And one thing to note is that the development of agriculture, the first agriculture was always in riverbeds. So irrigation is the primary challenge for planting water. So you needed to be able to plant where the water wasn't and then get water there. So the easiest way to do that was to plant where there was a floodplain, and then later to or plant where the water would then come, right? So early agriculture was in floodplains, first in the Tigris-Euphrates, but also the Nile. Later, the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, which is Byblos. Byblos is where we get the word for Bible, which is the word for paper. Papyrus is like, if you speak Spanish, pollo isn't the same. It means like chicken that you eat, but not like the chicken that runs around and is alive. Papyrus is like the stuff you eat. Byblos was paper. So anyway, Byblos, also ancient city, longest continuously inhabited city on a riverbed, the river of Adonis, and the Adonis River would also flood. And that was the foundation of their agricultural society. So this is a recurring motif, recurring narrative where it's on these flooding riverbeds that you see the early agriculture. Okay. Now, though, you have all these humans. We've gone through Homo erectus, Heidelbergensis, Neanderthalensis, Denisovans, sapiens. So now what? Now the Homo sapiens are going to emerge from Africa. Now already the Homo erectus had spread around the Eurasian, especially the Asian continent. The Neanderthals had spread and started working towards Asia, but it especially spread into Europe, and they were able to handle colder climates. And then you saw the mixture and the Denisovans emerge. And so humans come through, and already there is mixing happening, and the humans are joining the scene. And the humans are, Homo sapiens, I mean, the Homo sapiens are coming on. By the way, Homo sapiens are entirely black. The original Homo sapiens, black. The core genes of a Homo sapien, black. And then it's mixing with the Neanderthal, mixing with the Homo erectus, mixing with the Denisovans all over the world. And there would have been tons of continued mixing in Africa, tons of continued mixing in Asia, in the South Pacific, in Europe. And so now we have a very mixed race. Now humans continue to be an incredible mixture of all kinds of different humans. Um, and this continues to give us an incredible amount of variety. And as we learned earlier, variety is incredibly valuable when it comes to evolution and adaptation. So this is, you'll see, by the way, you see no traveling from here into the Americas. That's because we don't seem to believe that any species of humans made it into the Americas before Homo sapiens. So let's watch the story continue. And so we're left with a few questions. But first, we get to see this incredible history, this trajectory, the human development out of Africa, out of these species that came before us, and into whatever we are now, which we continue to ask every day, and we'll continue to ask throughout the entirety of this course and throughout the entirety of this program, or this general education department. Um, so one of the questions that I want you all to continue to ask yourself is, are we already cyborgs? We saw this history of evolution. What about technology, right? So one of the things you started to see is that we have evolved in relationship with technology. This idea that we are just, that evolution is nature and that technology is progress. There's more to it than that. We saw already, not only does the brain develop and advance around the use of our fingers, around the use of tools, around the use of language that improves our capacities, but also the invention of fire enabled us to completely change our stomach, which completely changed our brain. We are a post-technology species, for sure, already. It's something I think about a lot when I contemplate whether or not I'll take in all these crazy implants and possibilities that'll be coming our way to extend our life, to make us into immortals, to make us into spacefaring, people. Will we change our own genes? What will we call it when we start to actively participate in the formation of our own DNA? We're doing it now. Are we going to start making humans that can withstand the challenges of space? What will we start to do? Either way, we will definitely continue this story as long as we can, because that's supposedly the foundation of what this journey is all about. This is what the story of life is all about, just perpetuating life. At least that's the myth.